Good morning if you're in Los Angeles, and good afternoon if you're in England. Before we get started, let me remind myself today's May 1st, which is usually a celebration of communism. It's a big day for the communists. And I'll remind myself that communism and fascism are actually the same thing. They're just disguised in two different coats. The opposite of that is home economics, which is what we're standing up for. St. Joseph's the worker and that sort of thing. It's actually a religious thing to be normal and well adjusted, to have a huge middle class, to have a normal supply and demand curve, and to get everybody out of poverty, to maximize benefits and maximize utilities by making somebody else better off is a God and country thing. It's actually a Catholic thing. It comes out of monks and monasteries and that sort of stuff. We're a Catholic in the views, so in a very real way. We're a Yank. And so the purpose of these live broadcasts is to publicize and try and get you to start chiming in on the live chat. If you're a single mom and you have some children looking up to you and everything is dependent upon you, and you're working on godly hours, and you tell yourself this isn't going to work out, it's not going to work out. You're going to be plunged past the world of poverty. You're going to be plunged into despair. And so we're hoping you'll chime in. What's your take-home pay? If you're working, you're supposed to have a job. It's called a housewife. That was thrown out the window. So how much is your take-home pay? And then you turn around and say, how much are groceries? How much are childcare? How much are clothes and food? What's your food budget? If you were going to go back to being a home economist, doing the production side of things, how much does everything cost? And including a recreation budget. People used to sit around and talk about what they would do with all this recreation time they had in the United States. And they threw that out. And if you're a guy, how many hours do you have to work? Are you facing a couple of kids who are starting to call you dad, and you didn't know them a few months ago, no less, were around to conceive them, and you're stepping up and trying to take on this responsibility? But before you go any farther, you get to own the house, and you get to own the business. You don't rent property to people, and you don't rent property from people. You don't put people in housing projects, and you don't live in housing projects. Remember, I have about 3 dozen or so small anecdotes on our YouTube channel, and one of them is the lazy V. Remember, there's this letter V that goes off to the side, and then there's a line that goes straight across. And in the 1970s, they had a chance to cash in on it all, and they did, and they became the upper class. And this upper class caused all this poverty down here, all these people living in the streets. These people exist, then these people down here can't exist. These people down here come into being. If these people, the God and country, the guys who make money by putting you into your own business, when they exist, the criminal trial attorney that defends the poor and the oppressed, that sort of character, when they exist, these people down here disappear. But these people up here can't exist. And these guys are enemies. And that's what we're talking about here. We've gone past that. We're trying to get you to speak up. If you'll speak up and start putting numbers on this stuff, whether you're in Los Angeles or St. Louis or Tollsbury, England, or in El Salvador, bless your heart. Thank you if you're that president of El Salvador. And you start speaking up, you can do something about it. Let me remind myself just what home economics is. Home economics is the other kind of economics. It's this where the family unit, the married couple, is the smallest economic unit, like a brick. And that's how you get a detached house. That's how you get a detached house from the 1950s America that was very intentionally designed to get you out of poverty and into plenty. The opposite of poverty is home economics, is a detached house. It has a living room for you to live in, and it has a kitchen for you, a dining room to eat in, and a kitchen to service the, the dining room, and a bed to sleep in. And it has a utility room with washing machines and those sorts of things. It has a garage with a family car. They used to talk about the big American United States car. And so it has a car, it has a backyard. You get the idea. It's a smallest economic thing, and it gets you out of poverty. It's quite comfortable. How many bedrooms, how big is a bedroom how big should a bedroom be in order to house, say, 2 boys and another 2 girls? I'm half guessing is about 10 by 12 feet. Bedroom can comfortably hold 2 boys. You get the idea. It's done in very intentionally. If they threw that out, we're going to get you to go back to that. And so if you're listening to this and you're a girl, you go back to home economics and you start putting numbers on it. If you start adding numbers to this stuff, we can do something about it. Let's go back to home economics. Home economics is where the married couple is viewed as the base economic unit. 10-year-olds can't pay for their mommies. Mommies can't take care of their kids and go out and work in that sense of the word. And daddies can't go work in the furniture factory and then take care of the children. A lot like a computer. The example we use is the idea of there's a computer in front of you. You go up to that computer and you take out a transistor. You take out a second transistor, and as you take out the third transistor, it's no longer a computer. It's a pile of electronic parts. You put that computer back in, you put that transistor back in, it's back to being a computer, and there you go. You have the family as a base economic unit. It's back to being a computer. 10-year-olds can't pay for the mommies. Mommies can't take care of their kids. Dads can't work at the factory and come home and support and take care of the children. Once you do that, though, you're in business. You ask the gal how many oranges she wants to use. You know how many orange trees to plant in order to get everybody out of poverty and into plenty. Let's go back. There's our detached house from the 1950s America. And go off to the side, please. And at the bottom, start with farming and mining. Above that, manufacturing. Above that, wholesale, retail, and repair. And above that, retirement, education, and recreation. And doctors and lawyers, our kind of doctors and lawyers, form a kind of lattice that holds it all together. And it's the Catholic priest that causes all this to come into being to begin with. It's a religious thing. It's God and country. It's a Catholic thing. And we're a Catholic in the pews. We're a Yank. I picture a young couple in that house, and they're choosing whether or not to buy a couch or perhaps a couple of recliner chairs. And you can daydream and you can see all the farming that goes for the materials and all the mining, and then all the manufacturing. Let's say they chose a couch, and all of the that particular style, all of the stores, the way the stores are arranged, all of the advertising, it's all geared towards getting that young couple what they want. And there are catches to it, don't they? The guy who does the producing does the consuming. The guy who's in that house has to be the one who works at the furniture factory. And he has to make enough money to support a wife and children. And you go back to home economics that way. As long there was a guy named Adam Smith, and he wrote one of those overly bright Great Britain guys, and he pointed out that as long as when people start working in factories and that sort of thing, they specialize in labor. They produce more than they consume. And as the Catholic Church came up behind him and said, you got to practice virtues, Bob, and this is just an application of virtues. And once you did that, you realize that you could start producing more than you consume. And if you do things right, you start to have recreation time. That's how you get recreation time. All these good things happen as long as you arrange things that way. It also has to do with the attitude of the citizenry, doesn't it? You have to practice virtues. If you practice virtues, then people well, then other people are made better off. Throw out those virtues, and there's a smaller and smaller group of people who make themselves better off, and another group of people who have to start working more and more hours. It's called poverty. That's what communism is, by the way. Let's go back to home economics. You have to be a normal, well-adjusted person. And we have our own little tricks, anecdotes we use. So the Shop Manual definition of mental illness is the normal taken into the abnormal, from a cold to the flu to pneumonia. And both the priest and the atheist say the same thing. The Catholic priest says, hold on here, Joe, go backwards. Go back from pneumonia, back to the flu, back to a cold. And the normal is normal, but not good enough. For example, if you're a gal, sit in a chair and fantasize about the guys until you start to become sexually aroused. Now open your eyes, look around the room, and do it again, only this time you're trying to become pregnant. And you can see with a snap of a finger that the idea of original sin. To associate those thoughts that have to do with sex with actually becoming pregnant is not a natural thing, and also an unnatural thing. And so I know what original sin is. Or far worse from the point of view of the guys. And you can add fear to that and a few other things. It's the chimpanzee side of us. We'll adopt the other nature. We'll put that sack right side in, so to speak. And we'll straighten ourselves up emotionally. And then we'll will the good of another person. We'll try and make other people better off. If I arrange the parameters of competition so that there's a large middle class, there'll be a large middle class. Just so it said, if I start to breed a breed of normal, well-adjusted people, then there'll be a breed of normal, well-adjusted people. I think if you arrange the rules so that the guy who owns lots of businesses, it doesn't exist, but the guy who owns the franchise and puts you into an owner-operator franchise, well, he gets to go live in with the doctors and lawyers. I try and make him as better off as I possibly can. He's trying to make us all better off as I possibly can. And that's as opposed to communists who insist on owning everything, and they're a class of intelligentsia, and the fascists who do the same thing. So one calls it the government, one calls it business. Let's go back over here. We're back to that gal. You place the pleasures of sex inside of getting the gal pregnant, becoming pregnant, and there's a kid there, and you become a mother and you line those up. Just so it said, they separated for you. The pleasures of sex are your department. It's not the women's liberation department, and they're completely different. And then think of the Catholic nun. Go on to the computer and type in vocational stories of Catholics, nuns, and you'll see this exceptional sense of something in their disposition. They have a sense of joy. They have a sense of they have all the good stuff in them. So, and they line up that part of their personality that they turn the knob up on turns into the home economist. Turns into what we're going to call a citizen. And it's not a natural thing. That's what made up a citizen of a Yank. We were all, in order to be a citizen, we were a bunch of normal, well-adjusted people. And then we were a good husband and a good mother, a good wife, if you want, to take that up as a profession. And then a good mother. And motherhood is considered a profession. You train for it. You made a big deal about it. And you also got a house. If you were home economics, you're the one that gets to live in the house. And it was all torn apart. It was torn apart in the United States, most of the Western world, in the 1970s. In the 1950s, the communists said they would overthrow the United States government by about the year 1970, and 73, actually. And in 1973 was a watershed year for the United States. They won. They tore our country apart. They moved into the foothills and they reached a fork in the road. And instead of getting onto a maintenance level, they chose to go up in the foothills and become the upper class and a peasant and property class society. And that was when society started changing. And they do it to our society. The communists will say, do it until our society collapses and then come in and take over. And that's how they're doing it. And they said they would, they did, and it worked. Now you and I are living in dire straits. And so you're just going to have to start speaking up. If you're a guy and you're driving a forklift at a warehouse and you wonder what in the world is going to happen, well, it's not going to work out. But if you gather together and join our group, then you can start to change things. How many hours does it work in order to pay for a mortgage on a house? Not rent, and not a duplex renting out to other people. But how much is a mortgage? And how much is health insurance? And how much is a bicycle for the kids? And a car, a big American car in the driveway? And quite frankly, how much is recreation for you and your wife? The whole world centers around YouTube just to get something out. It was one of the hustles of the 1970s. That gal would have to live her life for the children, and they were hustling is what they were doing. Nope, doesn't work that way. You center society around that couple, and so if the gal chooses to be a common housewife, yeah, well, everything centers around her, not her children. And so she gets to go and play in that silly tennis tournament they have every year and that sort of thing. Just to get something else out, in the 1970s, lawyers are one of those things you can talk about to make the point. Lawyers have a totem pole, and at the bottom of the totem, when society was cashing in on everything, the bottom of the totem pole was the criminal trial attorney and the prosecutor, the Perry Mason types. And at the other end were the real estate attorneys and tax attorneys and stockbroking attorneys. They made about 3.5 times more money. And they considered the Perry Mason attorney as not stupid, but naive. They used to, I don't know if it's changed, but they would take an exam to be a lawyer after law school and all that stuff. And it was 3 days of testing. Nobody ever passed it on the first go. It's pretty rough. So, there's something there. And so I was doing my hang around and figure out what's going on. It was my undercover cop stuff. I would go hang out with these groups. I would go take classes in the physics department at the University of Arizona. I had no business being there. And you would learn a few things. And I was doing the same with lawyers. And you realize that what made them naive. And then you realized that the disposition of defending the poor and the oppressed was what made those lawyers naive. They gave up so much just to defend us all, and that was considered naive and not very bright and that sort of thing. At the other end was the tax attorneys, the business attorneys, and they would get into huge apartments and rent out property to other people. And they couldn't care less. They weren't guilty of anything. They had no guilt in them. They had no remorse in them. They had no empathy in them. They couldn't care less. They made money by forcing people to have to work more hours. In the Bible, that's called one of the unforgivable sins. And it didn't bother them. They couldn't care less. And they did it, and they won. You go back to the criminal trial attorneys, and you fall into this very strange world where you want to get a bunch of guys together, and you go over the downtown, you throw the bums out of there, and then you go find what's left of those criminal trial attorneys, and you beat them up, and then you throw a bucket of icy cold water on them, and then you pick them up and you insist they become the lawyers and judges. You insist they live in a doctors and lawyers neighborhood. You insist they take Wednesdays off, and they're the ones that play in that silly tennis tournament they have every year, whether they like it or not. And now you're back in business. You have the leadership style of washing the feet of the apostles. You're normal and well-adjusted. That's called a normal supply and demand curve, by the way. And let's go back to our housewife. If you're listening to this and you've got a couple of kids, you've got to start speaking up. If you'll put numbers to this, and you're a guy and you'll start adding up how many hours you'll have to work to go back to the 1970s. 1973 was, if I got the numbers right, the year of the highest standard of living in the United States as far as the average Joe. And then it split apart, just like the communists said they would do. It starts to look like the lazy V, it starts to look like that. And so we're going to go back to home economics. Donald Trump took office now, and we have to be careful. He has a chance to be a George Washington to the entire world. He actually did something that goes against the physics. He stood up to a bum's rush by himself. You can't do that, by the way. You have to have a third person defend you, and he did it all by himself. He's an absolute hero. But if he doesn't watch it, there's going to be some very fundamental mistakes, and if you do, it'll all be for naught. Ronald Reagan was a president in 1980. He was a Democrat. He was a union leader, and he was a stereotypical, what used to be called a blue-collar Democrat. He switched over to the Republican Party because the Democrats became so Marxist. And in the end, nothing happened. And so here we'll go behind Donald Trump's back and straighten out the courts. Instead of the courts taking up the stereotypical position of a satanic church, that is a church that has no religion in it. In our world, religion is, in this world, in the real world, the Catholic world, religion is made up of three things. There's two kinds of religion. First, you straighten out your emotions, you will the good of another person, and they go together like two segments of a line that form the lowercase letter I, and that dot on the line, the letter I, is that infusion, Christ rising on the third day, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. There's a kind of infusion there. And it's just as true in sociology as it is in the social psychology. And it's just as true in the social psychology as it is in our minds. You strain up your emotions, and there's some sort of infusion for a lot of people, and in some more than others. And that has to do with your emotions, and it has to do with the chemistry inside your head, and the cells inside the chemistry, and the atoms and the electrons in the atoms. And if they're right, then some of those electrons continue on when you die. There's something to tune in out there. They described things, one of the ways, as trying to have a radio that doesn't work very well, and you're trying to tune into something out there. And if you listen to the physicists, the honest ones, it gets spooky. We'll just assume that. We'll hold that as faith. And now we're a normal, well-adjusted Joe, okay? And we'll have a normal supply and demand curve, okay? Philosophical fancy pants us. So if you're hearing this, you're listening to this, we'll try and be on these live chats about 11 o'clock Los Angeles time and about 7 o'clock London time. And tomorrow on Sundays at about 8 o'clock Los Angeles time and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon London time. And if you hear this, try and get people to call in on the live chat. Try and get that gal who's in absolute despair and trying to get her to call in. How much money do I need? What do I need? If you happen to be a gal and you have some age on you and you happen to be a gal who was a professor of home economics, well, for God's sakes, speak up. I keep thinking, I keep trying to pronounce President Trump's wife's name. So I won't try, I'll be embarrassed. But she is an absolute perfect, she's just what we need in this camp as a representative of those gals that we need to stand up for. She's perfect for the job. And they kept shunning her. They wouldn't even put her on the cover of Vogue. And so we're going to be a man and change all that, right? And so if we could get her as a spokesman, that or a representative of, just like a Princess Di or a Jacqueline Kennedy, she'd be perfect for the job. And you notice she's the opposite of the women's liberation movement, even though she's a supermodel. She's the opposite of the gal who's the president of Mexico. And the president of Mexico and those gals, the leaders of the women's liberation movement, they're all in the same group. And you notice the gals who were the head of the women's liberation movement are in the same corral as the guys who cashed in on it all. And the same group as the black civil rights guys and the Mexican civil rights guys. Hillary Clinton is married to Bill Clinton, and they should hate each other's guts, but they don't. Al Sharpton should hate Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. They're the white guys in the but they don't. And then you realize they're in the same group. And over here is a completely different outfit. We're the ones that lost, and you have to change that. And so if you're listening to this, we'll be on the air tomorrow at about 8 o'clock Los Angeles and 4 o'clock. And we have a YouTube channel, The Priest and the Pimp. We have some bookkeeping to do, but we have about 3 dozen anecdotes that explain this. What's wrong? What do you do about it? And how do you do it? And on Facebook and Instagram, Time to Act, and a few other of the social media outfit. Well, that's it. I hope you pass the word. I hope you start speaking up. If you'll speak up, then you can do something about it. Donald Trump can only give permission from authority to do the right thing. It has to come up from you. And if you do, then what's wrong? They throw out God and country. They throw out those 3 things that make up God and country. Straighten up your emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because Christ rose on the 3rd day. What do you do about it? You go to the Supreme Court, and instead of the courts saying you can have no religion in government, you turn around and say you can have only religion in government. The Apostles' Creed is a terrific way of, a shot manual way of getting things done. You want to be in charge, take a vow of celibacy and poverty. You don't want to take a vow of celibacy and poverty. You don't want to be in charge, bub. And then it becomes the grand deduction. Society is made up of our citizenry, and then it's home economics. And once you get that far, you're in business. What's the summation of farms in this country? What's the summation of mines in this country? What do we need? What's a job? A job that works is a factory worker or a plumber. A job isn't a professional athlete, by the way. A very fundamental job is a housewife, and that's who we're counting on to call in and start straightening things up. So we hope to see you tomorrow. Please pass the word, and we'll see you tomorrow morning about 8 o'clock LA time.